Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a single criminal case, but one that really opens up a perfect storm of questions about law, about philosophy, and about how a state can define reality.
It's the case of Dr. Chen Jingwan, a researcher in China. He was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months for a crime called picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
And the entire basis for this was what? Just posts he made on social media.
On an international social media platform, yes. And what makes this deep dive possible is that we have a really rare set of documents. We've got the official legal rulings, the indictment, the appellate verdict, but we have them right alongside Dr. Chen's own self-defense.
Which was not your typical defense.
Not at all. He didn't just deny the facts. He used, analytical jurisprudence, complex systems theory, even contemporary philosophy of language to argue that the crime itself, as the court defined it, was logically impossible.
So that's our mission here. We want to understand this collision between, incredible intellectual rigor and state authority. When the evidence is just language satire, opinion, academic doubt, is the law a neutral system? Or is it just operating as the grammar of power?
It's a fascinating and frankly high-stakes test of a legal system's integrity.
Right. So let's start with the official record. Section 1. The case facts, the formal verdict.
The timeline is pretty quick. Dr. Chen was arrested in Kunming, that's in September 2022. He was charged in January of 2023 and then sentenced just a few months later in April.
And the charge, this picking quarrels and provoking trouble, specifically the part about using the internet, what does the prosecution actually have to prove?
Well, there are three key things, and you have to have all three. One, that he fabricated facts. Two, that he spread them on the information network. And three, and this is critical, that his actions caused serious chaos to public order.
It's a consequence-based crime, then. It's not just about what you say, but the effect it has.
Exactly. So the prosecution said he used, and this is their term, over-the-wall software to get onto these platforms.
So a VPN. He was bypassing the Great Firewall.
Right. And there, they said he spread false remarks that insulted and attacked the state leadership core and current political system. And that's what they claimed caused the chaos that justified 20 months in prison.
And Dr. Chen, he immediately appealed this.
He did. He challenged everything. The supposed falsity of the information, whether he knew it was false, and most importantly, the actual existence of any serious chaos. He also denied he had any intent to cause harm.
So how did the appellate court handle that?
It was decisive and honestly pretty dismissive. The Kunming Intermediate Court upheld the original verdict. They just flatly stated the posts were false information and they did cause serious public disorder.
Did he get a chance to present this big academic defense you mentioned?
And that's the crucial part. No. They decided not to hold an open hearing. So his entire detailed philosophical defense was never heard verbally in a public forum.
So they just ruled on the documents behind closed doors.
Pretty much. They noted that the appellant, Dr. Chen, did not submit new evidence, which, sounds very formal. But it kind of suggests they were putting the burden of proof back on him to prove his innocence, rather than on the state to prove its initial case.
And their final word was just
a simple statement that the public network space is not a land beyond law.
Okay, so that sets the stage. But now we pivot, because this is where we move from the legal formalities to the real intellectual core of this. Dr. Chen's defense was, it wasn't just pleading not guilty. It was a systematic attempt to dismantle the very elements of the crime.
It was. He treated the required elements, the objective harm, the objective act, the subjective intent. He treated them like scientific variables that the prosecution had completely failed to prove.
Let's start with maybe the most audacious one, element 1. The objective harm. The idea of serious chaos to public order. The court claims chaos, he brings in physics.
It's incredible. This is where his academic background becomes his shield. He argues the claim of serious chaos is, scientifically invalid. He pointed to his social media account, very few followers, almost no interaction. He called it an edge node in a huge, robust network.
Okay, an edge node. Let's just unpack that for the listener. What does that mean in this context?
Think of the internet as this massive, sprawling city. Most of the action, the traffic, is on the big highways in the center. An edge node is like a tiny cul-de-sac at the very edge of the suburbs. Chen was arguing that his tiny, isolated activity could not possibly trigger what system theorists call self-organized criticality.
The snowball effect.
Exactly. That tipping point where one tiny event cascades into a huge system-wide failure. He was basically telling the court, my expertise in physics proves my actions were incapable of causing the systemic harm you allege. You have failed to establish criminal causation.
Wow, so he's denying the causal link.
He is. And he didn't stop there. Since this is a consequence-based crime, right, harm has to have actually happened, he points to an empirical fact. His posts were still online, even after he was sentenced. Nobody was copying them. Nobody was sharing them.
So his point was the alleged serious harm was a complete fiction. It never actually happened. No consequence, no crime.
Precisely. The court was talking about a theoretical harm, and he was demanding evidence of an actual, measurable one.
Which then brings us to the second element he attacks,
Mm.
the Objective Act. The idea that he was spreading false information or rumors.
Right. And here he challenges the court's very ability to categorize his words that way. This is where the philosophy really kicks in.
He broke his posts down into different types.
4 types, yes. He
Yeah.
said some were art or satire, like cartoons. Some were subjective emotion, commemorative images. Some were rational views or theories. And only a few were objective descriptions of facts.
And his argument was,
His argument was that the first 3 categories, art, emotion, and opinion, they all lack something called falsifiability.
okay, falsifiability. That's a term of art. What does it mean?
It's a core concept in science and philosophy. It just means a statement is capable of being proven false. If I say, it is raining outside, you can go check. That's falsifiable. But if I say, this painting is beautiful or this theory is compelling, that's subjective. You can't prove it false in a legal or scientific sense.
So he's accusing the court of making a category mistake. They're judging art and opinion by the standards of a factual claim.
Exactly. He's saying to call a cartoon or an academic theory a rumor is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what those things are. It's like, I don't know, accusing a piece of music of being factually incorrect.
What about the fourth category, the stuff that was actual factual content?
For that, he just shifted the burden of proof. He argued that, look, an ordinary citizen has no legal duty and certainly not the resources to do a full-blown journalistic investigation of every single thing they share. He said if the state claims something is false, the burden is on them with their vast resources to prove it's false.
So a multi-pronged attack on the Objective Act. Now, what about the final piece, element 3? Subjective intent. The idea that he did all this knowingly.
This is maybe the most intellectually bold part of his defense. He completely denied having the certainty that's required for the word knowingly. He basically adopted a position of philosophical skepticism.
Saying what? I can't be sure of anything.
In a way, yes. He described himself as a prisoner in Plato's cave, someone who, as an academic, operates in a permanent state of doubt and can't be absolutely certain about complex political facts.
That is an incredible thing to argue in a courtroom.
It is. And then he does this amazing reversal. The prosecution's implied argument was, you're a highly educated man, you should have known better, therefore you're guilty.
Right. They used his expertise against him.
But he flipped it. He said, no, you're committing an academic crime by assuming that. He argued, it is because I am an expert in complex systems that I knew my actions would not cause serious chaos. Therefore, I lacked the criminal intent to cause the harm you allege.
That's brilliant. He's using his expertise to prove his innocence, not just of the effect, but of the intent to create the effect.
It's a stunning piece of argumentation.
Okay, so we've seen how Dr. Chen used science and philosophy to try and dismantle the legal facts of his case. Now let's pull the lens back even further and look at the bigger picture here, the structure of authority and meaning itself.
This is where it gets really deep. What's so fascinating is how you can use 2 different schools of Western philosophy to diagnose what went wrong here. One focuses on the rules of authority and the other on the rules of meaning.
Let's start with the authority one, analytical jurisprudence. We're talking about legal positivists like John Austin. So what's their basic take on what law is?
For a positivist, law is basically the rule that's enforced by power. Morality doesn't really come into it. Austin's classic theory is simple. Law is the sovereign's command, plus a sanction, plus habitual obedience from the people.
So from that very strict viewpoint, the verdict against Dr. Chen is valid.
Formally, yes, it's valid. The court is an agent of the sovereign. Imprisonment is the sanction. They would say it might be a bad law, but it's still law, formally effective.
That seems pretty bleak.
It is, but even Austin saw the potential problem. He warned that a command system risks logical failure if it loses any rational basis for obedience. The verdict here, when you strip it down, it becomes a tautology.
What do you mean?
The state defines order as obeying the state's commands. Therefore, any criticism of those commands is, by definition, disorder. It's a completely circular argument.
And later positivists like H.L.A. Hart, they had a critique for this kind of vagueness, right?
Hart did. His big idea was the rule of recognition, how we identify a valid law. He'd look at a crime like picking quarrels and say it has an open texture.
An open texture, meaning it's just really vague.
Exactly. The terms serious chaos, false information, they're just semantically ambiguous. They're rules full of holes. Now, in a healthy legal system, judges use their discretion to fill those holes impartially, but Hart would probably argue that in this case, that discretion was just seized by political will, and external command filled the gap, not internal legal logic.
So the positivist conclusion is,
Absolutely.
Watts, the judgment is legally effective, but intellectually and logically bankrupt.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's formally standing, but it's a logically collapsed system, a crisis of legality.
Okay, now let's shift to that second perspective.
Mhm.
The philosophy of language, with thinkers like Wittgenstein. This isn't about the authority of law, but the meaning of the words themselves.
Right. Wittgenstein's idea was that words get their meaning from their context, from the language game they're being used in. And what the court did here was a kind of violence to that idea.
How so?
It deliberately tore Dr. Chen's posts out of their proper language game. He was participating in an academic or satirical game, a context where skepticism and even hyperbole are normal. The court ripped his words out of that context.
And force them into the legal language game of disturbance.
Precisely. Power monopolized the language. The state essentially created a private language where only it gets to define what chaos or disturbance means. It made Chen's intent totally irrelevant.
And this connects to another idea, speech act theory. The difference between what you say and what you're trying to do by saying it.
Yes, J.L. Austin and Searle. They pointed out that some speech does things. A judge saying, I pronounce you guilty, makes you guilty. It's a performative act.
Right.
What the court did here was commit a pragmatic fallacy.
It ignored his intent in speaking.
It completely ignored his illocutionary intent. His purpose, which he said was to share knowledge or express emotion. Instead, they focused only on a manufactured perlocutionary effect, the supposed disturbance.
So they equated the act of simply forwarding a post with the ultimate effect of causing chaos.
They collapsed the two. They made the intention and the outcome identical by decree.
And the final layer here comes from thinkers like Habermas, looking at the judicial process itself as a form of communication.
This is the critique of the process. For Habermas, a legitimate system requires rational communication. The system has to be open to reason. By refusing to even hear Dr. Chen's detailed defense, by denying him the right to challenge their definitions, the system became.
It wasn't a conversation about facts anymore.
It wasn't a conversation at all. It became what you might call a discursive colonization. A scholar's identity was just forcibly stripped away and reconstructed into that of a criminal, purely through the state's monopoly on the language of the court.
So the language philosophy conclusion is that this was essentially an act of semantic violence. Legal words used as a ritual, a curse, not a statement of fact.
A war of language, absolutely.
So let's try to bring this all together. What does this all mean? The legal analysis, the positivist view, tells us the judgment is technically a valid law, but it's an unjust and collapsed law because its definitions are completely arbitrary.
And the language analysis shows us something deeper, that the whole process was one of power monopolizing meaning in order to construct a crime where, arguably, none existed in objective fact or rational communication.
And for you, the person listening to this deep dive really shows the highest possible stakes for legal clarity and for the integrity of language.
It does, because when criminal laws have such an open texture, and when everyday words like opinion or satire or fact can be politically redefined on the fly, a legal system stops being a system of predictable rules. It just becomes another tool of administrative control.
You know, both Austin and Hart, the positivists, they warn that a legal system needs a rational foundation to survive. It needs clear rules, and it needs a basis for people to obey willingly.
Which leaves us with a really profound and unsettling question. When the sovereign's command loses its rational basis, and the law itself loses its rational language structure, is that institution still serving the function of order?
Or is it simply operating the grammar of power, backed by nothing more than the threat of sanction?
As one source concluded, and I think this is the key takeaway, law here is still operating, but it operates not on rationality, but on fear.